Everything. Sorry, there was a little pop-up here. You can record everything. I'm sorry. You can watch everything again without narration, and you can take your time doing it. So we'll just get started. I do have a new laptop, and the keys are very sensitive, so hopefully it won't jump around too much. Okay. Actually, how do I hide this panel here? There we go. All right. So what is a lichen? So the historical definition is a symbiotic organism composed of a unique fungus and either a species of green algae, blue-green algae, now known as cyanobacteria, or both. Sometimes there are multiple strains of the algae. So the algae is a single-celled green plant, and it provides energy to the fungus in the form of photosynthetic sugars. And the fungus provides protection to the algae from predators, abrasion, and ultraviolet radiation. So blue-green algae also provide nitrogen as well as sugars of a different type. So recent research has shown that there are many other things living in or on lichens, such as bacteria, viruses, protozoans, yeasts, and other types of fungi. Bacterial communities with species numbering in the hundreds appear to play a major role in predator defense, nutrition, and other aspects, while yeasts appear to play a role in structural integrity. And there's a lot more to be learned with all these things. There's still a lot of people doing research. And so this unique combination has allowed lichens to inhabit the harshest conditions and on all continents of the earth. So why should we care about lichens? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. So numerous invertebrates use lichens as a food source or as shelter. Some of them will be camouflaged like lichens. Some of them will actually put lichens on their back and move around. So birds can use lichens to line their nests, and then they'll feed on the vertebrates that are hiding within there. This is a pretty important one. Lichens stabilize bare soil, and they trap dust and moisture, allowing mosses and higher plants to get established. And we'll talk a little more about that in a bit. They can break rock down into soil very slowly. They can fix atmospheric nitrogen and deliver it to the soil. They provide a winter food source for deer, moose, caribou, northern redback voles, and flying squirrels, among others. And they're very sensitive to air pollution, at least some of them are, and are used as environmental indicators. And some are used for antibiotic and antiviral properties. Some make dyes and perfumes. And lastly, reasons we haven't discovered yet. So your basic ingredients for a happy lichen, areas that have lots of lichens or the greatest biomass, most importantly is clean air, high humidity, ample sunlight, and moderate temperatures. So like Arctic latitudes, mountaintops, and coastal areas subjected to fog are really good places to find lots of lichens, but lichens do exist in all types of habitats. Metropolitan areas will have low lichen density due to pollution from automobiles and factories. Some prefer undisturbed old growth habitats, while others prefer just the opposite. But they do grow slowly. So if an area continues to be disturbed, you're not really going to see the lichens in there. So the oldest lichen is from Antarctica and estimated to be 8,600 years old. I have a little asterisk there because I've found some conflicting information from other sources, just on the location and the age. So lichens are also common in deserts, and they subsist on the dew that forms overnight. I'm hearing someone's voice right now. If everyone could mute themselves. Okay, so air quality. Lichens absorb a variety of nutrients from rainfall and the air. Unfortunately, they also absorb toxic substances such as heavy metals, radioactive isotopes, and sulfur dioxide. So sulfur dioxide is a byproduct of burning fossil fuels, and that kills the algae, which in turn kills the lichen. Historically, many lichen species were extirpated, which just means locally extinct, from cities, but clean air initiatives have resulted in the reappearance of many lichens that are particularly sensitive to air pollution. So the main lichen partners. So the mycobiont, it is the primary fungal partner, and all the structural components are fungal. So the photobiont is the algal partner. also known as the phycobiont in green algae and cyanobiont in cyanobacteria. The algae are a very small group. There's only about 100 species. So several of these algae can be found in numerous lichens. Trabuxia is the most common lichen-forming green algae, and it is found in 20% of all lichens. So it is a pioneer species, which inhabiting bare substrates. Trentipolia is another common green algae, but it is red or orange from carotenoids that are helping to protect it from the sun. Nostoc is the most common cyanobiont, which you really won't see here on Cape Cod. Only 10% of all lichens use cyanobacteria as their primary photobiont. A small number will use both green algae and cyanobacteria. So there were over 800 species of bacteria found in one lichen specimen. Yeasts appear to be common in lichens with complex growth. So nearly all lichens belong to the branch of fungi in phylum Ascomycota. In Ascomata are the fruiting bodies. In ascs is the structure where spores develop and are forcibly ejected into the atmosphere. There are close to 20,000 species of lichen, and nearly half of all ascomycete fungi are lichenized. So this is one of my favorite lichens to photograph. This is American starburst lichen, and all these little brown discs you see, those are the fruiting bodies. And the entire lichen here, we call that the thallus, the body of the lichen. So if you're not sure if you've ever seen green algae, you probably have if you've ever walked the beach. Sea lettuce is a type of multicellular green algae. All seaweeds are different types of multicellular algae. There's green, red, brown, and gold. Most of them do not form lichens with just a few exceptions. There's always exceptions in nature. Here's Trentipolia. So most lichen-forming green algae cannot be seen with the naked eye. Trentipolia is a common genus of green algae that is easy to see because of these red-orange pigments. So these pigments, mostly carotenoids, will protect the algae from the sun. And this one is growing on white oak. It is also commonly seen on gravestones. This is nostoc, a type of cyanobacteria, commonly found free living in nature in wet habitats, but not Cape Cod. Resembles a dark green seaweed. So lichens that contain these blue-green algae, they tend to be darker than those that have green algae.
Brought to you by ADT. Health insurance commercial, take one.
We've got someone. Can Elaine please mute their device? Right, so cyanolichens, they're the lichens that predominantly use cyanobacteria as their algal partner. So they're darker than most chlorolichens, not all. The chlorolichens are the ones with the green algae. So peltigeras and other cyanolichens are uncommon on Cape Cod. They prefer dark, humid, mature forests. But this is one of the species that we do have. This is scaly pelt lichen, and it is wet in this photograph. So where do lichens grow? Lichens may be found growing on just about any surface, but they usually favor one of the following substrates: trees, wood, rocks, or soil. Some species will grow on more than one type of substrate, and some will grow on man-made surfaces such as cloth, rubber, metal, or plastic. So here's several species of lichens growing on a rock, and a few of these can also grow on trees. So tree species, unlike fungi that may decompose deadwood or parasitize live trees, lichens will only use trees as a place to hang out. They get all their nutrients from the atmosphere. The hyphae, which is the basic unit of the fungus, may penetrate the cambium, but trees likely have developed defenses and have coexisted with lichens for thousands of years. And this is the very cool lichen you can find at Hoxsness State Park in Harwich. This is the smooth beard lichen, and it produces these long drooping displays, and it's really spectacular. Soil lichens are pioneer species that stabilize the soil. They secrete a substance that binds soil particles together. So they also trap dust particles and moisture, and this allows suitable habitats for mosses and higher plants to get established. Sometimes soil branches occur on low branches or on tree bases. And so these are all lichens in the genus Cladonia, which are the majority of soil lichens here. Rock lichens. Most rock lichens occur only on rock or rock-like surfaces, such as concrete and marble. So through expansion and contraction from wetting, drying, and freezing, and to a lesser degree from chemicals, they can slowly break rock down into soil. So this rock is completely covered in lichens. There's the green ones, the black ones, and the gray ones. There's probably some brown ones in there too. So the substrate. So a substrate is the surface or material on or from which an organism lives or obtains its nourishment. So some lichens are very substrate specific. Some of these factors of the substrate include texture, whether it's rough, smooth, stable, or unstable, its ability to retain moisture, its chemistry, and these next two are sort of based on the local environment, but nitrogen sources, commonly from bird droppings, and the local humidity. So speaking about humidity, some lichens, called dust lichens, they cannot absorb rainfall, and they prefer to live in dark, sheltered rock overhangs, where they get all their moisture requirements from just the ambient humidity. And they're also protected here from the drying effects of the sun. So this is a really cool one called sulfur dust lichen. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's little yellow dots in there, and those are the fruiting structures. And this guy hangs out in sheltered rock crevices. So about substrate pH. pH is a measure of the acidity of a substance. So the gravestone on the left here is made of marble and has high levels of calcium carbonate, which gives it a high pH, or it's basic. The gravestone on the right is granite or silica based, and it is acidic, or it has a low pH. So you can see they each have very different lichen communities. And so the same principle applies to tree bark as well. Concrete, cement, mortar, and brick are all basic, have a high pH. So there's soft, loose bark. The tree known as white oak has this soft, loose bark, and it retains water for longer periods of time, and it allows for more rare species to appear, like species that require more moisture. So this is a Loberia pulmonaria, and this is a lichen sensitive to pollution. And this one may use green algae, cyanobacteria, or both. And the little brown guys on the margins there, those are fruiting bodies that produce spores. So some are specific to rotting wood, which also retains moisture. Over here on the left, powderfoot British soldier. We have a few different species of British soldier on the Cape and in New England, a few more, but this is the one that is common on rotting logs. It's typically bent over like this and has these really large fruiting bodies. And the one on the right is typically found with it. This one is called fence rail Cladonia, Cladonia parasitica. So holly and beech trees have smooth living green bark, and crustose lichens that grow on these trees may actually derive nutrition from it. Now, this is the same species. So we've got one on holly on the left and one on beech on the right. They're actually the same species, but they're very different colors because hollies have an orangey inner bark layer and the beech does not. Some species will show up in the intertidal zone. This one here on the left is called sea tar, and when that one is wet, it is green, so you can look for that on tidal rocks. I haven't seen it on the Cape yet, but you can see it very easily at Ellisville Harbor State Park. And the one on the right is called driftwood rim lichen, and commonly found on driftwood out on the West Coast, but we don't have a lot of driftwood here on the East Coast, so you can often find it on piers and jetties. And then some lichens are parasitic on other lichens. So this one is called cowpie lichen, a very strange name. but it is parasitizing a cladonia lichen. So what it does is it incorporates the algae of its host and then eventually becomes self-sustaining on mosswood or soil and then switches its green algae pattern. So lichen growth forms. Lichen morphology comes in many different forms, but we typically break them down into 3 groups. Foliose. Can CNETPA please mute his computer? Thank you. Foliose lichens are leafy with clearly differentiated upper and lower surfaces. Fruticose lichens are shrubby and are more or less round in cross section. That is a fruticose lichen in the middle here dangling. And crustose lichens also have no lower surface visible. The lower surface is entirely embedded in the substrate. And there are no crustose lichens in this picture. So foliose lichens, I attach the substrate at numerous points by hair-like structures called rhizines. They have clearly discernible upper and lower surfaces. So on the left here, this is probably the most abundant lichen in Massachusetts, the common green shield, and Hypogymnia phazotes over here on the right. Hypogymnias have little inflated lobes, whereas most foliose lichens are very, very flat. These have lobes that are slightly inflated. Foliose lichens on rock, Xanthoparmelia on the left. This is the one that you find growing on asphalt. And the one on the right is called umbilicate folio species. This is common toadskin. And new growth in these particular lichens is placed at the center. So the outer edges become ragged. All other foliose lichens, they put new growth at the edges. And eventually the center will die out. Fruticose lichens, ones that grow on trees, are typically attached to the substrate at one point. Soil species may be attached at several points. There is no lower surface on fruticose lichens. That outer surface just goes all the way around. So this is Avernia mesomorpha on the left hand here. And one of my favorites, the fishnet cladonia on the right. All those little perforations in there are distinctive. It's probably it's the largest of the cladonias. Crustose lichens. In crustose lichens, the lower surface is completely embedded in the substrate. This one on the left here, there's actually a few, but the main one is called sulfur fire dot, and that one grows on cement. You can see little yellow dots around. Those are another type of crustose lichen, and the black is another one. On the right, this is red maple bark. Red maple bark is typically 90% or more covered in crustose lichens. So crustose lichens may also be further divided into several different subsets. And you probably don't need to know all these, but leprose means it's composed of tiny granules, and these are the dust lichens. Areolate means it has deep cracks that separate the lichen into little patches. Squamulose, this is sort of like sometimes the fourth growth form people talk about, composed of tiny scales. They're similar in structure to foliose lichens, but they're often referred to as crustose because of their small size. And then there's lobate placodioid, and those are elongated and radiating lobes. And we'll see that in this slide. This is an example of something that's lobate placodioid. This is the golden moon glow lichen. This is another very photogenic lichen with radiating lobes, and this is common on acidic gravestones. So squamulose and intermediate forms. Cladonias have 2 different growth forms. So remember, the thallus is the body of the lichen. This one has a primary thallus, which is vegetative, which are all these little scales at the bottom. And then they have secondary thalli, which are these fruticose fruiting bodies here. These hollow stems with a goblet at the top. And this is one of the mealy pixie cups. This is a common cladonia on the Cape. More about intermediate forms, cladinas, which are now placed in the genus Cladonia. These are the reindeer lichens, and they differ from other cladonias in that they have a granular crustose primary thallus, which you can see on the wood here. And this is where the fruticose branches, which are known as podetia, or they originate from. So this granular crustostallus is rarely seen. This is really the only species where you're actually going to see it. And really, this is the only one growing on wood, with just a couple exceptions. Here's another intermediate form. This is the pink earth lichen. So this is a crustose soil lichen with fruticose fruiting bodies, and it is common on clay soils. So photosynthesis. So in a lichen, many lichens have an upper cortex, and that is a tightly packed fungal layer that protects the algae below it. When it moistens, it becomes translucent, and this allows sunlight to reach the algae and start photosynthesis. And this will cause a color change. In green algae, you'll tend to turn the lichen to more of a green color. So there's barbs on the fungal hyphae, and they're known as haustoria. And what they do is they penetrate the algal cells, and they cause the algae to leak sugars into the body of the lichen. And so all fungi need carbon to survive, and this is how lichens get their carbon. So reindeer lichens in the genus Cladonia do not have a cortex. They grow on the ground and must take advantage of short-lasting dew events. They actually produce sunscreens to help protect them from excess ultraviolet. So when lichens are wet, they're metabolically active, and when dry, they become dormant, and they can be very, very hardy when they're dry. So this is just a cross-sectional view. It's got a little cutoff at the top here. But in crustose and foliose lichens here, they're neatly stratified. There's an upper cortex, that tightly packed fungal layer. The black dots are the algae. And then there's a gas-filled area in the middle called the medulla. And then there's a lower cortex, and then these structures called rhizines that attach to the substrate. Crustose in the middle, there is no lower cortex because the medulla attaches directly to the substrate. So crustose lichens, you cannot remove them without actually removing the substrate. So that would mean like bringing a hammer and chisel to a rock, or cutting off a piece of the bark with a knife. And fruticose down here at the bottom, they're very different. There is no lower surface. The outer surface goes all the way around. And so most fruticose lichens are round, but some of them can be flattened. And I just want to emphasize the fact that this outer surface goes all the way around, protecting the interior, and the algae are just on the inside of it. So there's another group of lichens called jelly lichens, and in those, cyanobacteria is the dominant partner, and it is uniformly mixed with the fungal hyphae, rather than forming stratified layers. And so when these get wet, they actually produce a translucent jelly-like texture. And this is a species of Leptogium known as blue jellyskin. So sexual reproduction. In all fungi, a germinating spore will send out a germ tube that branches to form several thread-like cells called hyphae. And in fungi that form lichens, those hyphae must come into contact with its compatible algae or cyanobacteria partner. So they then envelop the algae, become lichenized, and they start growing the structure that's unique to that symbiotic pairing. So this is a very slow process. Growth is typically under 2 millimeters per year, but there are a few fruticose species that grow close to 2 inches a year. Due to the slow growth of lichens and the lichen hyphae, many of them are outcompeted or consumed and are difficult to find before actually forming a lichen. So here's an example of some of these fruiting bodies. So the apothecium, or apothecia for plural, produces the sexual spores. And this is a star rosette lichen. This is common on hardwood trees and rocks. And all these black discs are the apothecia. This is a common one around here. Bushy beard lichen. All these little Venus flytrap-like structures are apothecia. They're the ones that produce the spores. This is parathecia, are similar to apothecia, but they are immersed in the thallus rather than positioned above it. This one is called Eastern pox lichen. Looks like poppy seeds. Laurelli are linear apothecia on the bark of smooth bark trees such as hardwoods and young white pines. And this is Phaeographus anusta, produces these star-shaped Laurelli. The common one, common strip lichen, does not produce the star shapes. Pertuserioid warts. So lichens in the genus Pertuseria produce fruiting bodies that make these little warts, and they have several openings at the summit called osteoles. Mesoidium is a dry powdery mass of spores on the head of a short stalk, and these are the stubble lichens, very, very small. This one is called fairy pins, and this one grows on the surface of Tricheptum biforme, which is known as the violet tooth polypore. So whenever you see that fungus, keep an eye out for these little fungi, or little lichens rather. Pycnidia, they're another type of fruiting body. They produced asexual male spores called conidia, and it is believed that conidia will donate a set of chromosomes that help an apothecia develop in a different individual. Unfortunately, this has never actually been seen. It's just been theorized. So they're visible as brown tips on the edges. These are little projecting dots, and sometimes they look like immersed dots. So in addition to producing spores, lichens have developed several asexual propagules. So any part of the lichen that breaks off that contains both fungal hyphae and the algae may form a new lichen. So the most common means are by fragmentation, soredia, and ascidia. And the shape and placement of soredia clusters, known as soralia, is a very important feature for identification. So these are soredia and ascidia, and you can tell them apart. So soredia are little balls of green algae enveloped by fungal hyphae, and they erupt from the interior of the lichen, coming right out of the medulla. Ascidia, on the other hand, over on the right, are little finger-like structures. Again, the little black dots are meant to represent algae, green algae. And either one of these, where the ascidia break off or the soredia get dispersed by wind, water, animals, insects, and wherever they land, they can form a new lichen. So there's granule and farinose soredia. Farinose soredia are just really much smaller and powdery. So on the surface of these, little powdery substance, those are all farinose soredia, and those can travel further than granular soredia. And this is lipstick powderhorn. So a soralium is a cluster of soredia, and their placement may be either on the margins at the tips or what they call laminal, which just means away from the margins. And you can see on this lichen, there's these little clusters of balls, and those are all clusters of soredia, and a little cluster is called a soralium. And this is an example of something that has ascidia. So again, ascidia are wart or finger-like extensions of the thallus. They can serve as asexual propagules, and they can also increase surface area to optimize photosynthesis and gas exchange. So all this dark area, those are all ascidia. And this is salted starburst lichen. This one is common on pines. And some species, like this one, produce both soredia and ascidia. In this one, when the ascidia wear off, they reveal these yellowish white scars, and coming out of those are soredia. And this one is called a braided brown shield. So here's some other structures to keep an eye out for. Cilia, if you look along the margins of this lichen, you see all these black hairs. So they're often found on the margins, in particular in the genus Parmotrema. And their function is not well understood, but it may serve to deter predators such as snails. Maculae, There are areas in the thallus with gaps in the algal layer, and it appears as like white mottling. If you look at this species, you can see some sort of like a mottled surface, and those are just gaps in the algal layer. And this is the hooded rosette lichen. This one produces little hoods with serratia on the tips. Pseudocyphilae are breaks in the cortex where the hyphae in the medulla can reach the surface. And this helps facilitate gas exchange through the interior of the lichen. And in species of Punctelia, they appear as this white speckling. And this is rough speckled shield, a very common lichen here. In the genus Parmelia, these pseudocyphilae are actually linear. So all these little white lines are pseudocyphilae. And the green dots you see, these are all serratia forming in the cracks of these pseudocyphilae. Tomentum is a felt-like web of hyphae on the upper or lower surface of the thallus, and it helps to scatter and deflect sunlight as well as retain moisture. And this is a species of Peltigra. Pruina are a fine powdery calcium oxalate crystal deposited on the upper surface. And like tomentum, it is believed to deflect solar radiation. And you can see it has a frosted look on the tips of this lichen. Here's an example of Pruina on the fruiting bodies on the apothecia. So this is smoky-eyed boulder lichen. Those fruiting bodies, all those little dots are actually close to the color black, but it's Pruina that's all over the surface that gives them this frosted color. And there's an eponychral layer. So in addition to Pruina and tomentum, there's a layer of dead photobiont cells and or fungal hyphae that may be added to the upper cortex that helps deflect solar radiation in species typically found in exposed habitats. And this is another species of Peltigra. The prothallus is the leading edge of many crustose lichens, and it just consists of spreading hyphae. And in the species in the middle here, you can see this dark outline, and that is the prothallus. Then there's this zone of contention. I made up this name. You can see all these black lines. So all these lines are separating individual lichens. And this black line is really the area where the two lichens are meeting and competing for space. So wherever you see a black line here is an individual lichen. And then rhizines. Rhizines are the root-like projections on the lower surface of folio species, and they attach it to the substrate. And this is a species of Peltigra. It's these fuzzy guys here. And lastly, we'll talk about secondary metabolites. And these are chemicals produced by any life form that help them with ecological interactions. So there are close to 1,000 secondary metabolites in the fungi kingdom. Nearly all of them are unique to lichens. That little asterisk there is because there's a lot of different information about this. Some websites will say that all secondary metabolites in nature are unique to lichens. So there's some weird information about this. Anyways, there are chemicals that make lichens unpalatable to predators, or they may act as sunscreens. Some are antibiotic or antiviral, and some are allelopathic, which means they prevent growth of nearby plants or mosses. And their presence can be tested for with chemicals such as 10% potassium hydroxide or household bleach. And there are other more sophisticated methods as well. So just some examples. This is red-fruited pixie cup, and the red that you see here in this species and the British soldiers is produced by a substance called rhodocladonic acid. A couple different substances, peritin and ooznic acid. So on the right, the yellow-green that you see here in these reindeer lichens and in the genus Usnea is a type of sunscreen to help protect them from the sun, but it's also antibiotic and antiviral. And people can make their own tinctures with this substance, with this ooznic acid. And over to the left, on this maritime sunburst lichen, the chemical that produces the yellow-orange is called peritin. And I want you to notice that if you look to the left of this, you can see it's actually light blue for most of it. So this portion of the lichen is growing in the shade. So this other portion to the right is growing in the sun. So this is stimulated by sunlight, the production of this chemical. And other chemicals will darken in highly sun-exposed locations. There's a couple of examples. This is sand-loving Iceland lichen on the left here, common out in the dunes, and Cladonia forcata on the right here. Similar to a reindeer lichen, but this one darkens in the sun. It does have a cortex. And just an example of what some lichens can look like when they're wet versus dry. This is smooth lungwort. On the left, it is dry, and on the right, it is wet. It's not the same exact specimen, but you get the idea. All the brown discs in here, those are the fruiting bodies producing spores. So here are just some links online that you can look at. The top one here, CNALH, is based out of the Southwest, but it does have good information for many lichens. It doesn't have every species in it. CNLH stands for Consortium of North American Lichen Herbaria. The next one, Ways of Enlightenment, is all photos. There's no text, but it does have a lot of really good photos. Lichens Marins is a European website, and that has a lot of good information. The next one, I highly recommend if you're just getting started out with lichens. It's from ANBG, which means Australian National Botanic Garden. And this will give you just a great overview of lichens. And there's numerous links you can go to within that website. So I highly recommend that one. And then Facebook groups can be really helpful for identification. Basically, any Facebook group with the name lichen in it, there will be people on there looking to help you identify your lichens. So you can post photos of them on Facebook. And here are just some books. Lichens of North America is the Bible of lichens. It's a giant book, and you really don't want to bring it out into the field, but it's got loads of great information, lots of great photos, and there's an associated updated key, a dichotomous key to help you sort through the species, because this was written in 2001, so a little bit out of date, but still the best book. Macrolichens of New England by Hines and Hines. Macrolichens are basically the fruticose and folio species, so it does not include crustose lichens, but it does have every fruticose and folio species in New England, so I recommend that one. But if you're just getting started out, Lichens of the North Woods by Joe Waluski is a great book. It's centered out of the upper Midwest, but it has a lot of the same species. It's a small book, and you can easily take that out into the field. Here's another field guide, Common Lichens of Northeastern North America. That is based out of the Nova Scotia and the Maritime provinces. So actually for Cape Cod, only about half of the species in that book you can find here, but it's another good resource. And then here's just some other books you can use. Delmarva is a little bit south of here. This Lichens Above Treeline is a good one if you're going up Mount Washington. And this newest book, Field Guide to the Lichens of Great Smoky Mountain National Park, is another great resource, and it has a lot of really good humor in it too. So it makes for a fun read. And so that is my presentation. I will go back to this if people want to write down any of these names, and we can go to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. I just want to remind people that we will send you this PowerPoint. So you'll have that available to look back to. So you don't have to feel like you have to madly scribble down right now these titles and names and links. We will also have this recording on our website and shortly. So you'll be able to go back and listen to that too. So, yes. If people have questions, just unmute yourself and let's have a little discussion. Anyone? Tom, maybe I can start out. Can you just talk a little bit about how you get these amazing photographs?
Oh, well, I actually am using a little point and shoot camera. So you need to have something with what they call macro potential, something that is able to give you photographs of close-up organisms or life forms. So this is a point and shoot. It's a Canon PowerShot A2200, and it actually does a lot better than I find a lot of the more sophisticated cameras. I've tried numerous different lenses, and I just haven't been able to get as close as I can with this camera. The trick to getting good macro photos is doing it on bright sunlight conditions. So if you're in like a bright sunny day, there's lots of shadows and contrast, and that's not good for photos. It's good for landscapes, but it's not good for close-ups. And this particular camera does well with that condition or direct sunlight, but it does really poorly in shade. So I haven't quite figured that out yet, but bright sunlight and like a macro camera.
Hey, Jane, do you want to go ahead?
I'm just looking for a field guide that I can carry around with me that would be most useful on Cape Cod. Which one of these books that you've listed would you say is most useful on Cape Cod?
Lichens of the North Woods by Joe Waluski.
Okay.
Yep, it's a small book. Doesn't have all the species, but it'll at least get you close. I have been working on a book, but I haven't been a little hesitant to finish it because I don't have any real experts in the field working with me to pick up any mistakes. So it's been in the works for several years, and I'm not sure if it'll ever come to completion. I've been working on it. But Lichens of the North Woods, I'd recommend.
Other folks?
Hi.
Hi, Elaine.
I noticed when walking along the beach areas, sometimes the lichen are very soft, when they're wet, and then other times they're very crisp and crunchy when they're dry. And I'm wondering if they're more susceptible to damage when they're dry.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, when they're wet, they're very pliable. And like you said, when they're dry, they become very crispy. Now, some lichens actually use that to their advantage. The soil lichens, I mentioned fragmentation as being a way of reproducing. So any lichens that break off pieces, like stepped on by deer, those little pieces can form a new lichen. So that's actually a little bit of a reproductive strategy. Unfortunately, because lichens grow so slowly, if they're pretty badly trampled, it's going to take a long time for them to recover. So if you're out walking around on lichens, I recommend doing it when they're wet so they don't get completely destroyed, but they can be a little bit slippery when they're wet. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just a note about that, when lichens are dry, they're really super hardy. So they're actually going dormant, and lichens have gone into outer space at the International Space Station and come back, survived, and reproduced. So when lichens are dry, they're very, very hardy. It's when they're wet that they're active and more susceptible to pollution, air pollution.
Other questions? Maybe Tom, just in closing, if you could tell us, great areas for those of us that are just starting our appreciation of lichens now, trails or places here in the Chatham, Orleans, Harwich area that you could recommend.
Well, for Harwich, Hawks Nest State Park, if you can find the trail that has the those drooping beard lichens that I showed a picture of in there, that is a nice spot. But the entire outer Cape Cod National Seashore is just fantastic. I go on my lunch breaks, I work in Truro, and I go to the woods around head of the Meadow Beach. And there's just loads and loads and loads of lichens. The beech forest in Provincetown, another great place. Anywhere out in the dunes on the National Seashore, there's just more lichens than you could even imagine there would be. It's really just a spectacular area for lichens. Sandy Neck is a good place for lichens in Barnstable, but they don't like people going off the trails. Where else? Some of the cedar swamps, like the Atlantic White Cedar Swamp in Wellfleet. There's also a few scattered around the Cape, like there's one in Katuitt. Those have some interesting lichens, like the lobarias, the Lobaria pulmonaria, so lungwort and the smooth lungwort. I'd say mostly the outer Cape. So in Chatham, Morris Island is really good for lichens. Also in Harwich, D. Isabel Smith Conservation Area has a lot of lichens. Thompson's Field in Harwich has a lot of lichens. Also has lots of dogs, and there's quite a few places on the Cape that are good for lichens. But I would say I'd highly recommend the Cape Cod National Seashore. And
Okay.
Tom,
Yeah.
I have a sort of marginal question. I don't know. I'm interested. Is there evidence of sort of medicinal uses of some of these lichens? I'm wondering, even in the Northeast Native American traditions, if there's any evidence of that.
Well, there is. So this is a funny question, because it seems like Native Americans made use of absolutely everything that they've come into contact with. So I don't keep track of everything that they used, but lichens in the genus Usnea, like the beard lichens, and anything that has the yellow color, that ooznic acid that makes that yellow color is a powerful antibiotic and antiviral compound. So a lot of people right now, like today, make tinctures with that by soaking it in alcohol. And I forget how else to make it. I haven't made it myself, but they swear by it. And they'll make a tincture out of the Usnea, and they'll just have a few drops every few days in the wintertime, and they never get sick. So that is one example of current use. And there's some more scholarly articles about compounds and lichens that are being used in the medicinal industry, but you probably have to search for that a little bit. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. But a couple other uses, some of those, that beard lichen, that heavily drooping beard lichen, because of its absorbing ability, and Native Americans use those as diapers. There is actually an edible lichen. Not very many lichens are edible, but it's called smooth rock tripe. It was not in the presentation here, but that is one of the few edible lichens. And even white settlers ate that during tough times out in the woods.
I have another just comment on my at home on my property. A section of a maple fell off, and I was driving by and I saw a deer nibbling on it, and I wondered too if that is a food source, obviously in winter, but also perhaps self-medication of some kind.
Oh, yeah, I haven't heard anything about that, about using it medicinally. It could be, could very well be, but they don't just eat it in winter. It's sort of like a last resort food, is my understanding. But in the Arctic, reindeer, also known as caribou, the reindeer lichens are their favorite winter food source. So 50% of their winter diet is the reindeer lichens in the genus Cladonia. So they don't seem to mind it too much. But if you go north, you can see like a browse line on trees. In areas where lichens grow down the trunk of a tree, you'll see a browse line where deer will eat up until they can't reach anymore. But I do not know about a deer eating it for antibacterial purposes. But that's an interesting question. I should look into that.
Any other last questions or comments? Well, again, thank you very much, Tom. And Tom will be back with us on April 30th for a webinar on tree identification on Cape Cod. This is actually going to be part of a week-long series of events that the Chatham Conservation Foundation will be doing in celebration of both Earth Day and Arbor Day. So Tom's talk will be sort of the capstone of that, of those events. So please put that on your calendar, go in and register for that, and we hope to see you back for that. And as I showed at the beginning, we have a number of other of these webinars coming up before our spring season of trail walks really starts up again. So we really hope we'll see you at one of those. If you're not a member of the foundation, please consider joining. We really would love to have you in our midst, or join our Facebook group. I think most of you have probably already signed up for our e-newsletter. If you haven't, just go to our website and sign up for that, and that will just keep you apprised of events that we have coming up and the works that we're doing. So again, Tom, thank you very much. And we hope to have Tom with us for a live walk or two this summer. So again, please stay in touch with us. So again, Tom, thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Everybody have a lovely Sunday.
All
Thank
right,
you, Tom. It was great.
great,
Learned a lot.
awesome.
And you will all, as I said, be getting copies of this, of the PowerPoint. So again, thank you.
All right, bye everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.